Now let us explain with a timeline example the release updates, the release update revisions, and the yearly releases. And for that example, I will use 19C here. So we start our time journey in April 2019. This was when 19.3.0, the on-prem release of 19C, became available. And 3 months later, when the next quarterly patches happen always in the January, April, July, and October, always at the Tuesday closest to the middle of the month. So typically it's a date around between 15 and 20 in January, April, July, and October. So in July here, we released 19.4.0. So the first release update, and the first release update usually doesn't contain so many fixes. At the same time, we released also the first revision for 19.3.0, so containing only new security and new regression fixes. And then in October, 3 months later, the second release update, the first revision for the July release update. So 19.4.1 is the first revision for 19.4.0, and the second and final revision for 19.3. So there's never a third revision coming. So there won't be a 19.3.3 in January. That is really important to mention, to explain, and I'll come back to this later on. In January then, 19.6, 19.5.1, 19.4.2, and in April, 19.7.0, 19.6.1, 19.5.2. If we make this now a bigger picture and go more into the future, don't be shocked, it looks like that. So there are a lot of colors here on that slide and a lot of patches. And I bet you agree here. Which patch should you apply? I'll give you a clear recommendation in a second. But first of all, be aware that patching for 18C strictly ends with the April bundle patches. So April 2021, that's not far away, actually, from now on. And there won't be any bundle patches. As far as I'm aware, the patching generally for 18, the premier support, will end of June this year. So also not very far away. And if you are on 18C, it's time to move to 19C for sure. And there won't be any extension and there won't be any extended support for 18C. So in end of June, game over. And the last patch bundles will be released in April this year. Now for 19, of course, when we go to the very, very right side of the slide, that goes further down the road until 2024. And then further for customers who have extended support for 19C until 2027. So I didn't try to fit that on the slide. 21C coming potentially soon. And for 21C, as it is an innovation release, as we explained before, innovation releases have no revisions. So you will get only release updates for 21C. But still the question remains, what should you do? But before we answer that question, an explanation what you could do, because that is different from the bundle patches and the PSUs we had before. Because now you can, you could jump before as well. No? You could start with the July bundle patch and then go to the July bundle patch a year later. So that's possible. When we start here our travel at 19.3.0, the base release, and we go live with 19.7. Let's assume that was our starting point. So 19.7 in April 2020. Then a while later you decided, oh, I'm interested only in the revision. So you went to 19.7.2. That is possible. Then you went to another revision, 19.8.2 in January 2021. And then you go back to the release update track to 19.11. That's also possible. So very different from the old patterns where it was really hard to go from a PSU to a bundle patch or the other way back. It only worked with a complete deinstall. This is much easier handled here. So you see, you can jump, you can go from release updates to revisions and back. You could even go, if you go to July 2022, in between one period, you could change from one to another, that's also possible. So there are no restrictions. The only thing you shouldn't do, even though it's technically possible with a new home, you shouldn't go to the left on that slide. Because if you go left, that means you miss security content. So let's see, I go in July 2022, I go back to the January one of the same year. That would mean I will miss all the security patches I had already in my environment from July and April. And we don't recommend that. And I think our notes say, oh, it's not possible. It is possible technically, but don't do that. It makes no sense. And this just caused trouble. Now, still, the question remains, what should you do? And this is what you should do. Stay with release updates. There are many, many reasons why you should do that. One of the reasons is, first of all, it makes your life easier. As you saw, there are so many patches. There's such a huge variety. I would strongly recommend you stay with release updates. Unless Oracle support tells you, no, you take the revision. We had such a case in Exadata very early 19.3. But otherwise, I don't see many reasons to go with revisions. Even though we recently had an interesting discussion on Twitter about that with some DBAs. Say, no, we stay with revisions, more stability. And this is the official label to brand revisions, giving you a stability release. And in theory, this looks great. But in practical environments, we will explain why you should stay with release updates. I'll give you an example. I call it the RUR Trap or pitfall. And this trap or pitfall means when you look at the upper picture, you decided you go on the stability track to revisions, and then you go 19.8 to 19.9.2 and so forth. When you look at the fine print with the yellow revision, you secretly consume also the October release update 19.9.0, and you consume the January revision 19.9.1. So even though it looks like, oh, I'm on revisions, and being on revisions means I get only the new security content, that's not true. After 6 months, you get much more. But you get a 6-month-old patch then, because when you apply 19.9.2 in April and you consume 19.9.0 from October, that is 6 months old already. Now, you could still argue with me and say, yeah, but it's just, I mean, what was potentially a regression in 19.9.0 has been fixed by then. And I agree, that could be the case. But still, you miss all the stuff we applied in January and April of the RUs, which may be over 1,000 fixes. And believe me, there's nothing worse than opening a service request. And I, as the support engineer, and I did this job 6 years, so I can tell you this from personal experience, have to tell you that, dear customer, sorry that you hit that issue, but that was fixed 5 months ago. And if you would be on the newest release update, it would be not an issue in your environment. And I had this situation now several times, especially with customers who went on the revision track for that argument of saying, oh, we are on the stability track. And in addition, what was really hard, and we need a one-off on top of revision, which took even a bit longer, which is not the intention, but in fact it happened. So I saw one customer going then to release updates. Everything was fine at this point. So I think this is a frustrating situation. I show you this with fictional numbers to make it more clear. So let's do a quick experiment. And let's assume every release update, every RU would contain 100 new fixes. And 25 of these 100 new fixes are security content. Let's limit it and restrict it only to security content. That would mean in the first picture, with every RU, I get 100, 200, 300, 400, 500. So every time 100 more fixes. Whereas in the release update revision track, I get only the 25 security fixes. So if I do this jump now from January to April on the revision track, that means I consume also now October and the January RUR. So I jump from 150 to 250. But these extra 100 fixes I get here are several months old. And at the same time, in April, when you go now to the upper picture, I would have 400 fixes in my environment, whereas I stay only with 250. So the chances are high that I hit something and support tells me, whoops, sorry for that, but this was fixed already. So this is why we strongly recommend that you stay with release updates and use the revisions only if there's a deep reason and Oracle support or a MAA document tells you you should go on that revision. But in all our cases, you stay with updates, please. And when you do a project, this is a patch. Don't do one of the, I think it's one of the biggest flaws I see in projects since more than 20 years. If somebody starts an upgrade or migration project, especially when it goes into a bigger scope of hundreds of thousands of databases, and then some genius does a freeze. And says, we make a freeze in April. And we use the January RU, or we use the January bundle patch. And then you upgrade actually in October or in December the same year. But you are frozen on the January one. So you use 1 year old content of patches and you're not open to new patch bundles. Don't do that. Apply new patches before you go live. It makes your life much easier. Maybe do a quick test, run some regression tests, but don't use when you go live like month-old patches. And I see this all over the place still. I know it's hard, but it's even harder if you go live and then you end up with 6 or 8 one-off patches because you hit issues which had been fixed already.